All right, y'all, here we go. Part 3 of research designs and the beginnings of causal inference. Remember, causal inference is our ability to determine that our cause preceded our effect, that our cause is correlated with our effect, and that we have ruled out possible alternative hypotheses. So, one of the best things that we can do to help support causal inference or establish temporal precedence is by using an experimental design. So remember, experimental designs are built upon first randomization, but then from there's some additional design points that we need to consider. So I'm going to flash a screen up here for you in just a moment, and it's going to look an awful lot like a sports book for my athletes, but I promise there is a method to the madness, so hang with me, okay? So when we talk about research designs, one of the things that we can do is we can do what's called diagramming a research design. Now, what you're looking at here is on the top, we have a traditional two-comparison group design. So first we randomize, which is what this big R means. And then we have a group of folks at time point 1. So we're giving them some sort of survey. We're taking stock of their symptoms. We're testing whether or not they have COVID, something like that. And then the group that has an X here means they're getting an intervention. This one down here has no X. So in this group of folks, there is no intervention. So you've got people randomized into this group, randomized into that group. These folks are getting the drug. These folks are getting the placebo. And then we do a measurement again to test for symptoms, to test for improvement. Okay? This is what's called a traditional two-group comparison design. This is very similar to something that you would see in a drug trial, the COVID vaccines. This is considered to be a really great process that helps us determine causality, okay? Now, sometimes we don't have the ability to do that pre-test, which is this time point 1 column that you see here. So another really common design that we see in experimental designs is a post-test only comparison group. So again, we're randomizing folks into a group. One group is getting the intervention, one group is not, and then we're taking a data point, okay? So this might be something like, okay, everybody in this particular place is going to start with a baseline level of knowledge, okay? Maybe you're teaching folks calculus for the first time, okay? You know that there was no point in pre-testing because nobody knew calculus before they took your class. And so the folks in this group are taking it with a new method of instruction, and the folks down here are taking it with the standard method of instruction. And then you take their final exam, right? And you see which group did better on their final exam. So this is sort of how you would diagram out an experimental research design, okay? Now, when we think about threats to internal validity, that first diagram that I showed you, that standard two-comparison group design, here it is depicted just a little bit more cleanly with than the R's and the X's. So we randomize folks into our experiment group or our control group. And we've got our folks at time point 1, our intervention, and at time point 2. So I want you to pause for just a second and jot down how you think this addresses those 3 causal criteria. How does this type of design show us that the cause came before the effect is correlated with the cause, and we've ruled out other designs? So go ahead, take a pause, write it down, and then when you're done, hit play. Okay, so hopefully what you jotted down was that this really helps us to understand those 3 criteria for causality, because at time point 1, we can take a baseline and see what the symptoms were, so that if there's a change at time point 2, we can correlate those 2 things together to show that there's that statistical relationship between those 2 variables. But that we're going to be able to see a change in this group of folks that we were not able to see in this group of folks that shows us this, clicked it, that shows us this is the reason for the design or the change that we see, okay? So if both of these groups are people who have heart disease, and we are able to clearly document that both of these groups of people have heart disease at the beginning, there might be a couple of rando people in this group who spontaneously got better. Maybe their wives put them on a diet and they didn't tell you. But for the most part, people in this group, their heart disease will stay the same when they get to the end because they did not have the intervention. But for people in this group at the second time point who did get our new amazing heart drug, these folks are going to have substantially less heart disease. Okay? So we can correlate these two things statistically. We can say the changes that we saw happened because of this, because we did not see the changes in this group. Now, some of the threats. If there was a population level threat like COVID or maturation, we're going to be able to see that in all of the responses from this group and in this group. Okay, so this type of design is also called a randomized controlled trial design. This really helps us to understand those three criteria for temporal precedence, for that causality. This is why this type of design is often considered to be the gold standard when looking at things like drug trials, vaccine trials, right? This is something that we're seeing play out in our world right in front of us as the COVID vaccines move to production. We can say that, these vaccines are effective and the people who got the placebo didn't have any effect, okay? Now, sometimes randomization isn't always the bomb, okay? So coming back over here, the first step that we did was randomize people into the experiment group or the control group. Sometimes that isn't always the best idea because ethically we might have a really hard time randomizing people into certain treatment conditions, right? We can't take a whole bunch of babies at birth and say, okay, infant 1, we are going to put you into a home where you are subject to child abuse. Even though that's a little questionable, we need to understand the effects, okay? Or you might not have two parents where they abuse one and not the other. Totally not cool. Can't do that. We might also not be able to randomize if there's a known treatment, and denying that treatment would be harmful. This was a lot of the problem with the Tuskegee trials, is because they tested the long-term effects of syphilis even though there was a treatment available at the time. We knew that penicillin was effective at treating syphilis, but they just chose not to give it to them because they wanted to test the effects. So sometimes randomization isn't ethical, and we have to consider this. Sometimes there are practical challenges to implementing randomization, such as contamination, right? If you randomize, if you've got a couple, right, a partner, we can't, we could ethically possibly put one partner into the experiment group and one partner into the control group. But if our intervention is about parenting skills, they're going to contaminate each other, right? The person receiving the intervention is likely going to behave differently and in such a way that it will contaminate our results from our control group. Sometimes service providers have preferences that we cannot change, and sometimes there's cost prohibitive things to consider. We might not be able to provide all of our clients this $9,000 intervention, even though it might be promising. So we can't always randomize there. And sometimes, treatments are out of our control. Okay, so if you had someone, we can't necessarily give them a parent with untreated bipolar disorder and ask them to grow up in that environment, nor can we say for sure that a treatment for children who grew up in possibly harmful homes would be the same for all mental disorders. So we can't always do that. So when we can't randomize, our options include quasi-experimental and cross-sectional designs. And we're going to talk about these on Monday, but I just wanted to show you what they look like for those who are curious. Notice anything? Looks almost exactly the same, right? The only difference is instead of a big R in front, there's an NR in front, which means that we are knowingly putting people instead of randomizing people from one into the other. Okay? So we're going to pick up here on Monday, but certainly if folks have any questions or concerns, let me know. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.